Okay guys, welcome to AP Biology. This semester, at least the start of this semester, is going to be a little different from usual because, well, I'm not there and you guys are in a computer lab. And so a lot of what we do in class right now is going to be online. You will be doing some labs. And so this is just kind of an intro to the idea of biology, what we're going to be talking about for the whole year. Major concepts and themes that we will be talking about repetitively over the whole semester. So to start off with, we will be getting some root words if you have not already looked at those. So the word biology, this is made out of two root words, bio for life and logy or ology, which is the study of. And so biology is the study of living things. Living things are incredibly diverse. In order to make sense of them, we group them into classifications that we call kingdoms. And so we currently have 6 kingdoms that we work with, but there is a proposal to make many, many, many more, because there's one kingdom that is just a bit too diverse to be very informative. And so we'll take a look at those kingdoms real quick. So kingdom Archaea and bacteria are both prokaryotic kingdoms, which means that they are bacteria. The regular bacteria that make us sick or that help us out come from this regular bacteria group that we interact with daily. Archaea, these are the bacteria that we don't come in contact with too very often. These guys mostly live in extreme environments. Salt lakes, the Dead Sea, thermal vents, all that kind of stuff. Fungi, plantae, and animalia we are fairly familiar with. The one kingdom that is under debate right now is Kingdom Protista. Kingdom Protista includes some organisms that are unicellular and some organisms that are multicellular, like this seaweed we're looking at here. It also includes some things that are heterotrophic or autotrophic or both. And so Protista is under a lot of scrutiny right now because it's just too diverse, and we're looking at splitting that one kingdom up into 6 or 7 different kingdoms all by itself. And so biology is a continually changing science. So these are the properties of life that we're going to be looking at. Just kind of go over a few quick points on each. First off, order and organization. And so there are different levels that we're going to be talking about here. To start with, we have the cell theory, and I'm going to talk about this word theory a little bit later, but it is an important word. So these 3 statements compose the cell theory, and it basically says that to be alive, you have to be made out of cells. And so again, there are different levels of organization. We're going to be taking a small to large perspective in this class, and so we will start out on the chemistry of biology, before working up to the organisms and populations and ecology. So here, we know that everything is made out of atoms. When atoms group together, that they make molecules. In biology, we have these biomolecules or macromolecules. They're interchangeable terms. When those work together, they create organelles, and organelles that work together create a functional cell. And so working our way up, so we left off with cells from last time. So when cells work together, they make tissues. Tissues working together make organs, so on and so on until we get to the full organism. On the population level, so if we have an organism and that organism is able to reproduce with another of the same type of organism, we call it a species. And when we define the time and location and place of that species, we can then refer to it as a population. So like you are a Homo sapien, okay? But in the room with you, so in the room at Summer Creek High School, you are now a population of Homo sapiens at that school, in that room. A community is when you have multiple populations living in the same place and interacting. And so if you think about like your home community, you know, it's people, but there's other stuff too. You know, there's your dog, your cat, your goldfish, the grass growing in the backyard, the weeds your mom made you pull over the weekend, you know, all that kind of stuff. And so those are all living things, they're all interacting, and so that's a community. And looking even bigger, when we add in the abiotic or non-living features to a community, we refer to that as an ecosystem. If an ecosystem recurs over and over and over predictably, we can then refer to it as a biome. And so some biomes that you're familiar with are like the tropical rainforest, the desert, the tundra. When we hear those words, there's definite pictures that pop into our minds about what that place is like. So that's a biome. And then when we add all those biomes together, we get a biosphere. And so the biosphere is actually all the livable levels of the Earth. And so it includes parts of the atmosphere, the land, and underwater. And so that's all organization. Here with regulation, we have this very key term, homeostasis, which is basically how an organism maintains a stable internal environment regardless of anything else that's happening around the organism. And this can be handled through both positive and negative feedback. So the jackrabbit we're looking at here, he has a very distinct feature of having these very, very large ears. And within these ears, we see all these blood vessels running through the ears. And so this is a special feature that allows him to maintain homeostasis. So how does this help him out? So if you're thinking anything about temperature regulation, you're on the right track. And so he uses a form of negative feedback so that when his body temperature gets high, as the blood flows through the ears, these ears act like a radiator, where these blood vessels are taking the hot blood and allowing the air to run past all these blood vessels, taking the heat away and letting the blood cool back off and return to the body of the animal. And so this is a type of negative feedback where the temperature gets too high, and now we're going to lower the temperature back down. Energy, all organisms, anything that's alive is able to metabolize. And so metabolism are basically all the chemical reactions that take place within the body that allow for energy conversion. Growth and development. So we have information passed to us from our parents that carries DNA, our genes, and this sets forth a specific pattern of development. So we will be talking about embryological development, but basically that there's a stepwise process that has to happen in order to grow an organism, in order for that organism to develop. Reproduction is basically the main goal of any organism, is the ability to pass on their genes to the next generation. And so this ability is called fitness. So fitness is this idea that if you have been successful enough in your environment that you can reproduce and have offspring, and your offspring have offspring, then that indicates a high degree of fitness and a high level of just really good DNA. So basically, it's an idea that if you can survive and reproduce, then I have really, really awesome genes. Organisms also respond to their environment, and so we experience our environment every day, and humans have come up with like a lot of ways in which we kind of cope with the environment. So if it's hot outside, we go inside and turn on our AC. If it's too bright and shiny, we can pull down a shade. But other organisms, particularly plants, are not able to move as much in response to their environment. However, they do respond. And so this quick clip shows a tomato plant responding to its environment. Come on, YouTube. And so this is a tomato plant. And so we can see that throughout the day, the plant continues to bend towards the light of the window. Let me redo that for us. All the way back. Okay, so you can definitely see a tilt of the plant, and it becomes more upright, and the leaves are fully facing the window, so to maximize the light absorption for photosynthesis. And so it can't move around like we do, but it can still respond to its environment. Okay. There you go. Adaptations are basically a trait, a characteristic that makes an organism well suited for its environment and more likely to pass its genes on and be reproductively successful. And so it's not that, the seahorse just happened to have these little notches that look like the coral that it lives around, but that over many, many generations, the seahorses that had these little protrusions and the right coloration were able to blend in better, survive better, and pass on their genes better than seahorses that did not have that feature. And so it's not saying that they can suddenly arrive, just bring about a new condition, but that it takes time, it takes many generations, but that an adaptation is something that can make you successful in that particular environment. Now, if the environment were to change, that adaptation may not be the best thing anymore. So just because you're adapted now does not mean that you'll be adapted forever. And so I know this list looks a little simplistic. Living, not living. So, your cat, a plant, bacteria, all living. Soccer ball, not living. Mushroom mold, also living. But a flu virus. Take a minute and think about a virus and its characteristics. So hopefully you took a minute. So viruses are not alive, and I know this is going to come probably with some contention, but it basically boils down to that a virus does not meet all of the definitions of life. And so while they can become adapted, while they kind of respond to their environment, they don't regulate homeostasis like we would think of as a typical organism, and they don't process energy, and they are not organized into cells. And so pretty much for me, it's kind of like they're not made out of cells is really the big thing for me. But there's a lot of other things that they don't meet the requirements to say that they are alive. A virus mainly depends on its host cell for many of the things that it needs. And so it uses its host cell for homeostasis and metabolism. It also uses its host cell during reproduction. And so a lot of books will still list viral reproduction as viral replication because they're not really, there's not a mommy and a daddy virus out there having baby viruses. They don't grow and develop. They are assembled into fully functional units. So there's not a developmental stage. There's not a sharing of genetic information to create a new virus. And so for those reasons, they're not considered alive. We're going to quickly go through some of these themes of biology. We already kind of hit on a lot of them, so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time here. Emergent properties is the idea that the assemblage of many parts into a whole, that whole is more useful and more beneficial than all of the individual parts that it was made from. And so the bicycle is a commonly used example that, the utility and purpose of a bicycle is more important than a single gear that it could be made, that is used to make the bike. Interactions, we talked about interactions. All organisms interact with their environment at some level. I know it sounds silly, but we have this lion resting in the shade of the tree, and so he's going to take a nice nap, but whenever he wakes up and gets up and stretches and gets ready to walk off, just like when we wake up in the morning, we go to the bathroom, so is the lion. And so when he urinates on the tree, he's fertilizing the tree provides shade, all these kind of interactions that occur all the time. Energy transfer and transformation. So we know that all energy on the surface of the planet at least starts with the sun, so we have solar energy, and that is harnessed through photosynthesis by plants and algae, and photosynthetic bacteria also. And so once that is converted into sugars, now that sugar is storing chemical energy. We, being heterotrophs, we consume that chemical energy from our food and transform it into the kinetic energy of work. There's a big idea that structure fits function, and so here we're looking at two types of leaves. So on the right-hand side we have this big broad leaf, very, very green, and so it has lots of chloroplast, lots of chlorophyll for doing lots and lots of photosynthesis. But on the other side, well, the stem is green, but the leaves, these little spines, have lost their pigmentation. They're no longer used for photosynthesis. Instead, these spines are more of a defense mechanism to prevent animals from eating the photosynthetic tissue, and also to help prevent water loss. Again, the cell theory, the three statements that kind of give you an idea of what a cell is, the basic idea. Here we're also looking at eukaryotic versus prokaryotic cells. Take a few minutes, look it over, read about it in the book. The main difference that a lot of people look at when defining a eukaryotic versus a prokaryotic cell is the presence or absence of a nucleus. And so the nucleus for a eukaryotic cell is the region that contains the DNA. You'll see in a prokaryotic cell that there's no specific region or membrane-bound DNA. And so the DNA is kind of loose within the center of the cell, but it's not in any special container, whereas a eukaryotic cell has a container or a nucleus for that DNA. So the only prokaryotic organisms are bacteria. Everything else is eukaryotic. Heredity. that we have a molecule, a genetic molecule, that can pass on traits from one generation to the next. That this molecule has regions on it called genes that code for specific proteins, and that these genes can be regulated. And so we mentioned some of these words earlier, the positive and negative feedback. So negative feedback, just like with the jackrabbit, his body temperature got hot, so the blood circulation increased in his ears, helping him to cool off faster. Same thing happens with us. We go outside, we get hot and sweaty, and as that sweat evaporates, we have evaporative cooling to help cool our body temperature back down. Those are examples of negative feedback. Most reactions in our body are negative feedback, where the end product that's made will go back and stop a reaction from taking place. Positive feedback is less common in our body. One example is the formation of blood clots. So if you have an injury that causes platelets to accumulate, you want those platelets to keep accumulating so that you can heal your wound. You don't want those platelets to accumulate and then, like, they say, oh, hey, we're all here, so we don't need to be here anymore, and then they all split up, and then you continue to have an injury. So positive feedback in that case keeps those platelets clinging together to keep that clot continuous so that your body can heal. This is an example of an operon. We'll talk about this later, but basically the end product, this amino acid tryptophan, can lock into this repressor. That repressor can bind to the DNA and prevent it from being transcribed. And so this is basically shutting down this pathway for this gene so we don't make any more tryptophan. Because basically if we already have enough, why keep making more? Okay, sorry about that, guys. I had a crying baby. So the idea of evolution is change over time. And Charles Darwin explained it through the process of natural selection. And basically that the organisms that are the most fit for their environment, or the most well adapted, are the ones that will be successful at reproducing. And so we have this question of who is the fittest. So on the left we have Tim Tebow, an athlete, and on the right we have Mama June, which is Honey Badger's mom. And so if our definition of fitness is the ability to successfully reproduce, who's the fittest? So we know that June has several children, but Tim is non-reproductive. So think about that. Okay, here with the how scientists think and scientific method and everything, you have these slides to just kind of read through, make sure you understand it. I do want to talk briefly about this word theory. So in science, the word theory means a certain degree of certainty, that you are very, very, very certain that something is true, and you are almost so certain that you want to make it a law. And so physics has laws, the law of gravity, the law of inertia, but biology, since we're dealing with living systems and we can usually find an exception to the rule somehow, it is very, very difficult in biology to make a law. And so the theory of evolution is not just an idea, it's a highly supported statement. And so you hear the word theory misused on TV all the time, or even in newspaper articles, magazine articles, where they're using the word theory as an I guess statement, Well, to us in science, an I guess statement is really a hypothesis. And so sometime this week, take a look at, newspaper article, magazine, watch TV for a bit, and find a quote where the word theory is misused. It happens all the time. So have a good evening, read the chapters, and I'll see you guys soon.